When my daughter sent me a heartbreaking text saying, "Please don't come for Christmas, we only want close family around," I swallowed my pain and simply replied, "No problem, have fun," even though it shattered me inside. You know, sometimes the cruelest words come from the people you expect love from most. For me, it was 13 simple words from my own daughter, words that tore open a wound I didn't even know I had, but ultimately, they became the catalyst for the most astonishing, brutal, and utterly liberating twist of my entire life. What Melanie, my only child, couldn't possibly have known was that on the very day she chose to shatter my heart, I had just quietly settled into a brand new, breathtaking $22 million mansion. And when one of my friends, completely innocently, posted a picture online, well, let's just say my phone didn't stop ringing for days. It was just before Christmas, a few years back. I was standing there, in the imported food section of Whole Foods, carefully picking out the finest Belgian chocolates. You know, the kind you buy for a truly special family Christmas gathering. I'm Vivian Thorpe, by the way. At 58, I still had a knack for turning heads, a grace that had softened over the years, replacing the brashness of my youth. My silver hair, long and perfectly waved, cascaded past my shoulders, and my emerald green cashmere coat hugged a figure that yoga and good genetics had been incredibly kind to. Then, my Hermes bag buzzed. A text. From Melanie. My heart just stopped. "Please don't come for Christmas. We only want close family around." 13 words. That was it. 13 little words. I just stood there, the expensive truffles forgotten in my perfectly manicured hands, reading those words over and over and over again. Close family. Close family. I was her mother. I had carried her for 9 long months, nurtured her through every childhood fever, every teenage heartbreak. I put her through college, helped with her wedding, babysat her children countless times. I was her mother. But apparently, I wasn't close family anymore. My fingers moved almost instinctively, before my brain could even catch up. I typed back, just 2 words, "No problem. Have fun." Then I set my phone to silent, shoved it deep into my bag, and somehow, I kept shopping. But this time, I was only buying for one. See, here's the thing, and this is what Melanie had no idea about. What she couldn't have known. Her rejection, that cold, casual dismissal, landed at a time when my life was actually exploding with more reasons to celebrate than ever before. Just 3 months prior, my dearest friend and business partner, Margaret Ashworth, had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And in her will, she left me everything. Her entire estate. $22 million. A mansion straight out of a fairy tale. Properties scattered across 3 different states. Art collections that museums would quite literally kill for. But I hadn't told anyone. Not yet. I'd quietly moved into Margaret's, now my sprawling coastal mansion, needing time to process not just the crushing grief of losing her, but also this seismic shift in my own life. This house, Windermere, it sat on 15 acres of pristine Connecticut coastline. Every single window, floor to ceiling, offered these breathtaking, endless views of the Atlantic. Every morning, I'd wake up in the master suite, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and pink that no artist could ever hope to capture. The mansion itself was a monument to old money elegance. Marble staircases curved so gracefully between floors. The library held first editions that scholars would weep just to touch. The wine cellar? Bottles older than our very democracy. It was the kind of place where every single room whispered stories of refined taste and absolutely unlimited resources. And before that text, I'd been planning to invite Melanie and her family here for a truly special Christmas. I'd pictured her children's faces, wide with wonder, when they saw the enormous Christmas tree I'd have placed in the grand foyer. Cozy evenings by the massive stone fireplace. Finally, I thought, I'd have the space and the luxury to create the kind of Christmas memories that would last forever. Instead, I got 13 words telling me I wasn't close family. That evening, I sat in Margaret's favorite chair, my favorite chair now, overlooking the ocean. In my hand, a glass of wine from a bottle worth more than most people's cars. The house felt enormous around me, yes, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel lonely. There's a crucial difference, you know, between being alone and being lonely, and I was finally learning to appreciate that distinction. I thought about Christmases past. How, over the years, I'd slowly felt myself receding, becoming more and more like a supporting character in my own daughter's life. How Melanie's husband, Andrew, would barely make eye contact with me, clearly considering me beneath their family's oh-so-important social status. How my grandchildren, while polite, were always distant, more interested in their expensive gadgets than spending any real time with their grandmother. How I always left their gatherings feeling somehow smaller than when I arrived. Well, I thought, taking another slow sip of wine, they want space. They'll have all the space they need. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I had friends. Good friends. People who genuinely valued my company, my conversation, my presence. People who didn't see me as an obligation or an embarrassment. It was time, I decided, to find out who my real family was. Let me truly paint you a picture of this home, Windermere. Because understanding its sheer magnificence is absolutely crucial to understanding the seismic shift that was about to happen. This Ashworth estate, though I suppose it was the Thorpe estate now, sat like a crown jewel on the Connecticut coast. Margaret had named it Windermere, and the moment you turned through those wrought iron gates, you knew you were entering something truly special. The main house, it was built in 1897 by a railroad baron, someone who wanted to create a summer cottage that would outshine even the Vanderbilt mansions in Newport. And he succeeded, spectacularly. The facade was constructed from limestone quarried in France, shipped stone by stone across the Atlantic. Ivy climbed the walls in perfect, artful formations, as if nature itself was reverently embracing the building. Inside, no expense had been spared. The entrance hall featured a chandelier that had once graced a Parisian palace. The main staircase? Carved from a single piece of mahogany, its banister worn smooth by generations of wealthy hands. Every room was a masterpiece of design, from the sapphire blue morning room where I now took my coffee, to the emerald green library where Margaret and I had spent countless hours discussing business and life, sharing secrets and dreams. But it was the view, always the view, that truly stole your breath. Every single window on the ocean side of the house framed a picture-perfect vista of the Atlantic. On clear days, you could see for miles, watching sailboats drift across the horizon like white butterflies. During storms, the waves would crash against the rocks below with such raw force that you could feel the very house tremble, not with fear, no, but with a kind of exhilarated power, as if it, too, was energized by nature's fury. I'd been living here for 3 months, quietly, settling into a life I had never even dared to imagine. I hired a small, discreet staff, Mrs. Chun, who had been Margaret's housekeeper for 20 years and knew every secret the house held, David, the groundskeeper, who tended the vast gardens with the devotion of a monk, and James, a chef who had trained in Paris and could create pure magic with simple ingredients. Most mornings, I'd wake early and walk the grounds in my silk robe, coffee cup in hand, feeling like the heroine of a novel I was just beginning to write. The gardens were spectacular, truly. Formal rose gardens that bloomed even into December, thanks to a sophisticated greenhouse system Margaret had installed. Walking paths meandered through woods filled with towering oaks and maples, leading to a private beach where I could sit on warm days and feel completely separated from the entire world. I hadn't told Melanie about any of this. Not the inheritance, not the move, not the complete, utterly astonishing transformation of my circumstances. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, but if I'm truly honest, I was testing something. I wanted to see if my daughter cared about me, Vivian, the person, or just Vivian, the provider of financial assistance and occasional babysitting. The test results, it seemed, were becoming increasingly clear. 2 weeks after receiving that devastating Christmas text, I decided to host a small gathering. Nothing elaborate, just a few close friends for cocktails and dinner. Margaret's friends, who had become my friends. A former colleague from my consulting days. My neighbor Patricia, a retired ambassador with the most fascinating stories you could imagine. Harold, an art dealer who had been trying to court me in the most charmingly old-fashioned way. Mrs. Chun, bless her, outdid herself with the preparations. We set up in the main salon, with its soaring ceilings and those magnificent windows that looked out over the moonlit ocean. Candles flickered on every single surface, and a fire crackled invitingly in the massive stone fireplace. The conversation was intelligent, stimulating. The wine was exquisite. And for the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt truly, utterly at home. Patricia, bless her diplomatic heart, suggested we take photos. Vivian, darling, she cooed, you look absolutely radiant. This house, this view, it's like something from a dream. We simply must capture this moment. I didn't think much of it when she posted a few photos on our social media. Patricia had a wide network of international contacts, and she was genuinely proud of our friendship. The photos were beautiful, me in a midnight blue silk dress that brought out my eyes, laughing with friends against the backdrop of that endless ocean view, crystal glasses catching the candlelight. I went to bed that night feeling a profound sense of contentment, a peace I hadn't known in decades. I slept peacefully in a bed that cost more than most people spent on their entire living room furniture. I woke up to 59 missed calls from Melanie. 59. My phone had been on silent, and each missed call notification felt like a small, sharp slap across the face. I scrolled through them, watching the timestamps. They had started coming in around midnight and hadn't stopped until dawn. There were frantic text messages too. Mom, call me immediately. Where are you? Why didn't you tell us about the house? We need to talk right now. Mom, please, I can explain about Christmas. I set the phone down on the bedside table and walked to the window. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, calm and untroubled. Seagulls wheeled and dove, following their own ancient, unchanging rhythms. The world outside was peaceful, beautiful, utterly unchanged. Inside, everything had irrevocably shifted. I made myself a cup of coffee, the really good stuff, imported from Jamaica, and settled into the window seat to watch the sunrise. My phone continued to buzz with incoming calls, but I ignored it. For the first time in years, I held all the cards, and I was in absolutely no hurry to play them. I let the phone ring for 3 days. 3 full days of missed calls, increasingly frantic text messages, and what I can only imagine was utter chaos in my daughter's household. I, meanwhile, was experiencing a level of peace I hadn't felt in decades. I read books by the fireplace. I took long, luxurious baths in the marble soaking tub. I even had Mrs. Chun teach me to make her grandmother's dumplings. I was rediscovering who Vivian Thorpe truly was when she wasn't constantly trying to prove her worth to people who had already decided she wasn't worthy enough. On the 4th day, I finally answered. Hello, Melanie. Mom. Her voice was high, strained, almost a shriek. Oh my God, where have you been? I've been calling, and I've been right here, darling, I said, my voice calm, almost serenely detached. Living my life. There was a pause. I could practically hear her trying to recalibrate, trying to figure out how to handle this version of her mother, the one who didn't immediately apologize for not being available every second of every day. Mom, I saw the pictures. Patricia's pictures. That house. Mom, why didn't you tell us? I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter warmth, and gazed out at the vast, shimmering ocean. Tell you what, exactly? About the inheritance. About the mansion. About everything. We thought you were comfortable, but not like this. We thought you were just comfortable. Not wealthy. Not secure. Just comfortable, like a little old lady in a modest retirement home, grateful for whatever crumbs of attention they threw my way. You didn't want me around for Christmas, remember? You only wanted close family. Mom, about that. No, Melanie. My voice was suddenly firm, leaving no room for argument. Let me be very clear about something. I'm not going to listen to excuses or explanations about why you excluded me from your holiday plans. You made your choice based on what you thought I was worth to you. Now, I'm making mine. Another profound silence. When she spoke again, her voice had completely changed. It was wheedling, manipulative, in a way that made my stomach churn. Mom, I think there was a miscommunication. I think. Exactly what you said, I cut her off, my voice steady. Don't insult both of us by pretending otherwise. Can we start over? Maybe you could host Christmas this year? That house looks incredible, and the kids would just love. I'm afraid I'm quite busy, darling. But Mom, it's Christmas. Yes, it is. And I'll be spending it with people who actually want me there. I hung up. The phone immediately started ringing again. I turned it off and handed it to Mrs. Chun. Could you please put this somewhere I won't be tempted to look at it for the rest of the day? She smiled, that knowing, quiet smile of hers. Mrs. Chun had excellent instincts about people. She tucked it into a kitchen drawer. That afternoon, I called my attorney, Richard Carroll. Richard had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years, and he was exactly the kind of lawyer you want in your corner. Sharp as a blade, ethical as a priest, and completely unimpressed by family drama. "Vivian," he said when I reached him. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. How are you settling into the new place?" "Very well, thank you." "Richard, I need to discuss some changes to my will." There was a brief silence on the other end. Richard was too professional to ask questions, but I could sense his attention sharpening. "Of course, what kind of changes are we talking about?" "I want to remove my daughter as beneficiary completely." "I see. And redirect those assets, too." I had been thinking about this for days, meticulously. "I want to establish several trusts. One for each of my grandchildren, accessible when they turn 25, but only if they maintain a relationship with me independent of their parents' wishes. Another for Mrs. Chun, who has been more family to me these past months than my actual family. The art collection goes to the Metropolitan Museum. The house and remaining assets." I paused, looking out at the endless ocean. "The house goes to Patricia's granddaughter, Emma. She's a lovely girl, and she'll truly appreciate it. The remaining liquid assets can be divided between the animal shelter where I volunteer and the literacy program at the local library." Richard was quiet for a long moment. "Vivian, this is a significant change. Are you certain this is what you want? Family conflicts can sometimes be resolved with time." "Richard, my daughter texted me that I wasn't welcome at Christmas because I wasn't close family. This isn't a conflict. This is a clarification." "I understand. I'll draw up the new documents. Would you like to come in next week to review them?" "Yes. And Richard, I'll need one more service from you soon. Something more personal." "Of course, whatever you need." After I hung up, I sat in Margaret's study and thought about the woman who had left me this incredible gift. Margaret had been 15 years older than me, a wildly successful businesswoman who had never married or had children. She had always said I was the daughter she never had, and I had been the friend she could always count on. Margaret would have understood exactly what I was doing. She had always believed that love should be reciprocal, that respect should be earned, and that family was defined by loyalty, not blood. That evening, I had dinner alone in the formal dining room. A meal Mrs. Chun had prepared with the kind of care that comes from genuine affection. As I ate, I thought about Christmas past again. I remembered the year Melanie was 12 and had wanted a horse more than anything in the world. I had worked overtime for months to afford riding lessons and gear, driving an hour each way to the stable 3 times a week. She had lost interest by February. I remembered the Christmas when she was in college and had brought her boyfriend home, a young man who spent the entire visit making subtle jokes about our small house and quaint traditions. Melanie had laughed along, embarrassed by the mother who was sacrificing everything to pay her tuition. I remembered last Christmas, when I had brought homemade cookies and carefully selected gifts for each family member, only to be seated at the card table in the kitchen while the important adults ate in the dining room. Well, no more card tables for Vivian Thorpe. I picked up the phone Mrs. Chun had returned to me and scrolled through my contacts. I had friends. Real friends. It was time to start planning a Christmas that would be worth celebrating. But first, I had a surprise to prepare for my dear daughter. After all, she had expressed such sudden interest in spending time with me. It would be rude not to accommodate her. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of December day that makes you believe in magic. I dressed carefully for my appointment with Richard, a charcoal gray wool suit tailored in London, paired with my grandmother's pearl necklace. When you're about to rewrite your entire legacy, you should look the part. Richard's office was in downtown Greenwich, housed in a building that looked more like a private club than a law firm. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, the faint, expensive scent of old tobacco that seemed to permeate old money establishments. It was the kind of place where serious people made serious decisions about serious money. "Vivian," Richard stood as I entered his office, gesturing to the chairs arranged before his massive mahogany desk. "You look radiant. Coastal living agrees with you." "It does, doesn't it?" I settled into the leather chair, crossing my legs elegantly. "Thank you for fitting me in so quickly. Always a pleasure." He opened a thick folder. "I've drafted the documents according to your specifications. Before we review them though, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain about this course of action? $22 million is a substantial sum to redirect away from one's only child. I met his gaze steadily. Richard, my daughter texted me 4 days ago to tell me I wasn't welcome at Christmas because I'm not close family. Yesterday, after seeing photos of this house on social media, she called 59 times, begging me to start over. The only thing that changed between those two conversations was her perception of my net worth. Does that sound like someone who should inherit a fortune? Richard nodded slowly. Point taken. Let's review the documents. The next hour was spent going through the dense legal language that would reshape my family's future. Every clause was precise, every contingency covered. The grandchildren's trusts were structured to encourage education and independence. They would receive generous monthly stipends starting at age 21, with the bulk of their inheritance available at 25, but only if they maintained regular contact with me. If they allowed their parents to manipulate them into cutting me off, they would receive nothing. Mrs. Chun's trust would ensure she could live comfortably for the rest of her life, with enough left over to take care of her own family in China. She had shown me more loyalty and genuine care in 3 months than my daughter had in years. The art collection, worth approximately $3 million, would go to the Metropolitan Museum, with a wing dedicated to Margaret's memory. She would have loved that. And the house, the house. Emma Richardson, Patricia's granddaughter, was a lovely 26-year-old who worked for Doctors Without Borders. She had visited with Patricia several times, and I had been charmed by her intelligence, her compassion, and her complete lack of interest in my wealth. She saw the house as a beautiful place, not a prize to be won. She would treasure it. There's one more thing, I said, as Richard finished explaining the final provisions. I want to add a clause that if Melanie contests this will, she forfeits any claim to even the token $1,000 I'm leaving her. That's wise. It's called a no contest clause, and it prevents frivolous challenges. He made a note. Though I should mention, given the size of your estate, she will likely contest it regardless. Let her try. I signed each document with a flourish. I've documented every slight, every dismissal, every time she made it clear that I was more of an obligation than a joy. My journals go back 20 years, Richard. Any judge who reads them will understand exactly why I made this decision. As we finished the paperwork, Richard leaned back in his chair. You mentioned needing another service. I smiled, and I'm sure there was something feline in it. I want to host a dinner party. Nothing too elaborate. Just Melanie, her husband, and a few carefully selected guests. I'll need you to be there, along with your wife if she's available. Patricia, of course. Harold. The Weatherbys from the yacht club. People who understand the value of genuine relationships. A dinner party, Richard mused. Think of it, I said, my voice dripping with honey, as a practical demonstration of my new circumstances. Melanie has been so eager to reconnect, now that she knows about the house. I think it's only fair to give her what she wants. Richard's eyes glinted with understanding. He'd been practicing law for 30 years. He recognized a perfectly legal form of revenge when he saw it. I'll clear my calendar. When are you thinking? Next Saturday evening, 7 o'clock. Black tie optional, but encouraged. I stood and gathered my purse. Oh, and Richard, when the topic of my will comes up, and it will, please feel free to be as detailed as necessary about its current provisions. Of course. Should I prepare any specific documents? Just copies of the signature pages. I want everyone to understand that this isn't a threat or a negotiation. It's already done. I left Richard's office feeling lighter than I had in years. The December air was sharp and clean, and my heels clicked confidently on the sidewalk as I walked to my car, a silver Mercedes that had been Margaret's but suited me perfectly. On the drive home, I called Mrs. Chun. We're hosting a dinner party Saturday evening. 8 guests, formal service. I want to use the Haviland china and the crystal from the vault. Something elegant, but pointed, for the menu. Let's discuss options this afternoon. Of course, Mrs. Thorpe. How pointed are we talking? I loved Mrs. Chun's directness. Sharp enough to draw blood, but subtle enough that only intelligent people will notice. Ah, she said, a small, knowing chuckle in her voice. That kind of dinner party. I have some ideas. When I arrived home, I found my phone full of messages again. Not just from Melanie now, but from Andrew as well. Apparently, he had discovered just how much his mother-in-law was worth and was suddenly very interested in family reconciliation. I deleted them all without reading past the first few words. Then I went to my study and pulled out the leather journal I'd been keeping since Margaret's death. On today's page, I wrote, "The die is cast." Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to show them exactly who they really are. Melanie is about to learn that when you treat someone like they don't matter, you shouldn't be surprised when they begin to agree with you. I set down my pen and looked out at the ocean. The afternoon sun was turning the water into a sheet of gold, and sailboats dotted the horizon like white promises. In 3 days, my daughter would get everything she had asked for, a chance to be close to my newfound wealth, an invitation to the family gathering she suddenly craved, and the opportunity to show what she would do with the opportunity. The call came Tuesday morning while I was having breakfast in the morning room. The sapphire blue walls caught the early sunlight beautifully, and I was enjoying my coffee and croissant while reading the Times when my phone rang. Mom. Melanie's voice was smaller than usual, almost hesitant. I was hoping we could talk. Really talk this time. We are talking, darling, I said, a slight amusement in my tone. I mean, in person. Maybe I could come see you? And Andrew could come, too. We could bring the kids, show them their grandmother's beautiful new home. Interesting. Now, it was their grandmother's home. Not just some house she inherited. Actually, I have a better idea. Why don't you and Andrew join me for dinner this Saturday? I'm having a few friends over. Nothing too elaborate, just an intimate gathering. The relief in her voice was palpable. Oh, Mom, that sounds wonderful. What time? What should we wear? Should we bring anything? 7 o'clock. It's black tie optional, so whatever makes you comfortable. And don't bring anything. I have everything we need. Black tie optional? She sounded suddenly nervous. Will there be important people there? Just friends, darling. People I care about. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled. The trap was set, baited with exactly what Melanie valued most, social status and access to wealth. I spent the rest of the week in careful preparation. Mrs. Chun and I planned the menu with the precision of generals planning a battle. Every dish would tell a story. Every course would carry meaning for those clever enough to understand. We would start with amuse-bouches, tiny, perfect bites that looked expensive but were essentially empty, all presentation with little substance, like Melanie's sudden affection for me. The first course would be a salad of bitter greens with vinaigrette, beautiful to look at, sharp on the tongue. The fish course would be salmon that appeared delicate but was actually farmed, not wild, pretty, but not quite what it seemed. The meat course would be beef that had been seared to perfection on the outside but was still cold at the center. And for dessert, a soufflé that would rise beautifully but collapse the moment you touched it. Mrs. Chun understood immediately. Very elegant, Mrs. Thorpe. Very educational, I thought. I also spent considerable time selecting my outfit. I finally chose a midnight blue silk gown that I'd bought in Paris but never had occasion to wear. It was cut perfectly for my figure, elegant without being flashy, expensive without being obvious. I would wear Margaret's sapphire necklace, the one worth more than most people's houses, and carry myself like the woman I'd always been, but had never been recognized as being. Thursday afternoon, I called Patricia to confirm her attendance. Darling, I wouldn't miss it for the world, she said. I take it this is the dinner where we finally meet the famous daughter, among other things. Should I wear my diplomatic immunity? I laughed. Just wear something that makes it clear you belong in places like this. I want Melanie to understand the caliber of people who actually value my friendship. Friday evening, I took a long bath in the marble tub, using bath salts that cost more per ounce than most people spent on an entire dinner. I painted my nails a deep red called Victory, and I fell asleep early, feeling more at peace than I had in months. Saturday dawned gray and drizzly, but by afternoon, the sky had cleared to reveal one of those crisp December days that make the ocean look like hammered silver. I spent the morning walking the grounds with David, reviewing the outdoor lighting he'd installed for the evening. Even in winter, the gardens were spectacular, and I wanted everything perfect. At 5 o'clock, I began getting dressed. The gown fit like it had been painted on me, and the sapphires caught the light with every movement. I arranged my silver hair in an elegant updo with the skill of a woman who had been beautiful for 58 years and intended to remain so. Mrs. Chun had outdone herself with the preparations. The dining room looked like something from a magazine. Candles reflected in crystal. Flowers arranged with mathematical precision. Every detail calculated to impress. The table was set for 8, with china that was older than America and crystal that sang when you touched it. At 6:30, I stood in the grand foyer and surveyed my domain. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. At exactly 7 o'clock, the first guests arrived. Harold brought flowers, not grocery store flowers, but something that had clearly been arranged by a professional. Patricia arrived with her husband, looking diplomatic and distinguished. Richard and his wife came bearing champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At 7:15, Melanie and Andrew arrived. I watched through the window as their car, a BMW that had seemed impressive when I'd helped them buy it, pulled up behind Harold's Bentley and Richard's Mercedes. I saw Melanie's face as she took in the other vehicles, and I recognized the expression, the sudden, dawning understanding that she was playing in a league she'd never imagined. When Mrs. Chun opened the door for them, I was waiting in the foyer, glass of champagne in hand, looking every inch the society hostess. Melanie and Andrew, I said warmly, moving forward to embrace them. How wonderful to see you. Melanie was staring at the chandelier, at the sweeping staircase, at the glimpse of the dining room beyond. She was wearing a cocktail dress that was perfectly nice for dinner at a suburban restaurant, but looked suddenly shabby in these surroundings. Mom, she breathed. This place it's incredible. Thank you, darling. Come, let me introduce you to everyone. The next 30 minutes were a masterclass in social dynamics. I watched Melanie and Andrew navigate conversations with people who casually mentioned their homes in the Hamptons, their recent trips to their places in Aspen, their latest art acquisitions. I watched them realize that these weren't people trying to impress anyone. These were people for whom this level of wealth was simply normal. And I watched them understand that I belonged here, that this was my world now, and that they were the ones who didn't quite fit. Shall we go into dinner? I suggested, as Mrs. Chun appeared to make the announcement. As we moved toward the dining room, Patricia slipped her arm through mine. Vivian, darling, she said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. You've created such a beautiful home here. Margaret would be so pleased to see how perfectly you've settled in. She always said you had exquisite taste. Thank you, Patricia. That means everything to me. Behind us, I heard Andrew whisper to Melanie, who's Margaret? And I smiled, because the real education was just beginning. The dining room at Windmere had been designed to impress, and tonight, it succeeded beyond even my expectations. The mahogany table, which could seat 20 but was now set for 8, gleamed under the light of the crystal chandelier. Each place setting was a work of art, the Haviland china painted with delicate roses, crystal glasses that caught the candlelight like captured stars, silver flatware that had been polished to mirror brightness. Mrs. Chun had arranged white roses and winter greenery as a centerpiece, but she'd been sharp and clever about it. Hidden among the beautiful blooms were thorns, not obvious unless you looked closely, but definitely there for anyone who reached too eagerly for what appeared to be pure beauty. I had given considerable thought to the seating arrangement. I placed myself at the head of the table, naturally, with Richard to my right and Patricia to my left, my most trusted allies flanking me. Harold sat beside Patricia, and his warm smile across the table reminded me that I had admirers as well as friends. Melanie, I placed directly across from me, where I could watch her face throughout the evening. Andrew sat beside her, next to Richard, a positioning that would allow my attorney to have several interesting conversations with my son-in-law. As we settled into our seats, I raised my champagne glass. Before we begin, I want to propose a toast. To family, both the family we're born into and the family we choose. To friends who stand by us through all of life's changes, and to new beginnings. Here, Patricia said warmly, and the others joined in. I noticed Melanie's hand trembling slightly as she lifted her glass. Whether from nerves or excitement, I couldn't tell. Perhaps both. Mrs. Chun served the amuse-bouches with theatrical flair, tiny, perfect bites on mother-of-pearl spoons, each one a miniature work of art. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the wine, but I was watching my daughter's face as she tried to follow discussions about art auctions and charity galas, winter homes, and summer travels. Vivian, Harold said, gesturing around the room. You've done wonders with this place. Margaret's taste was impeccable, but you've made it truly come alive. Thank you, Harold. It's been a labor of love. Margaret was such a remarkable woman, Patricia added. Vivian, you simply must tell Andrew and Melanie how you two met. It's such a wonderful story. I smiled, recognizing the diplomatic setup. Margaret and I met 25 years ago when I was consulting for her company. She was expanding into international markets, and I was brought in to handle the cultural integration aspects. We were supposed to work together for 6 months, and Melanie, I continued, finally finding my voice, we discovered we were kindred spirits. Margaret became my business partner, my mentor, and my dearest friend. When she decided to semi-retire, she insisted I become her equal partner. We traveled together, built the business together, shared everything. How wonderful to have such a friendship, Richard's wife said, genuinely touched. So rare to find someone who truly understands you. Yes, I agreed, looking directly at Melanie. It is rare to find people who value you for who you are rather than what you can do for them. The first course arrived, the bitter green salad, artfully arranged and delicious despite its sharp edge. Harold complimented the vinaigrette, and Mrs. Chun appeared to accept the praise with a small bow. This house must be worth a fortune, Andrew said suddenly, and I saw Patricia and Richard exchange knowing glances. It was exactly the kind of graceless comment that marked him as an outsider in this company. Well, Harold said diplomatically, when you love a place as much as Vivian loves this one, its value becomes immeasurable. Of course, Patricia added smoothly. Margaret did leave Vivian quite comfortable. 22 million, wasn't it, darling? The number hung in the air like a dropped crystal glass. I watched Andrew's fork freeze halfway to his mouth, watched Melanie's eyes widen to impossible dimensions. Something like that, I said casually, as if we were discussing the weather. Margaret was very generous. 22. Melanie's voice was barely a whisper. Million? Yes. Plus the properties in Aspen and Martha's Vineyard, though I'm thinking of selling those. Too much maintenance for one person. I took a delicate bite of my salad. The art collection alone is worth about 3 million. Margaret had exquisite taste. Andrew looked like he might choke on his wine. You inherited 22 million? Among other things? The business interests, the investment portfolio, this house, of course, I gestured around the dining room. Margaret believed in taking care of the people she loved. The silence that followed was profound. I could practically see the calculations running behind Melanie's eyes. All the years she treated me like a financial burden. All the times she acted embarrassed by my modest lifestyle. All the subtle digs about my small house and simple car. Mom, she said finally. Why? Didn't you tell us? Before I could answer, Mrs. Chun appeared with the fish course, the beautiful farm-raised salmon I'd selected. As she served, I considered my response carefully. Tell you what, exactly? That I'd come into some money? When would that conversation have happened, Melanie? During the Christmas invitation I didn't receive? Richard cleared his throat softly. If I may, he said, Vivian has been handling this transition with remarkable grace. It's not easy suddenly managing such substantial assets. The legal paperwork alone has been extensive. Paperwork? Andrew asked, his voice sharp with sudden interest. Oh yes, Richard continued, and I recognized the gleam in his eye. New wills, trust arrangements, charitable bequests, very complex stuff. We just finalized everything this week, actually. I saw Melanie and Andrew exchange a look across the table. The conversation continued around us, Patricia telling a charming story about a diplomatic dinner in Prague, Harold describing a recent art acquisition, but I could feel the tension radiating from my daughter's end of the table. The meat course arrived, perfectly seared on the outside, cold at the center. Mrs. Chun had outdone herself with the symbolism. As we ate, I watched Melanie push her food around her plate, clearly lost in thought. Vivian, Richard's wife said, Patricia tells me you're planning to travel more now. How exciting. Yes, I'm thinking of spending the spring in Tuscany. Margaret had a lovely villa there that I've never had time to properly enjoy. Another property? Andrew asked, his voice climbing slightly. Just a small place. 15th century, completely restored. About an hour from Florence. The views are supposed to be spectacular. I was enjoying this more than I should have been. Every revelation was another small shock. Another piece of evidence of just how wrong they'd been about me. Mom, Melanie said suddenly, her voice tight. I need to use the powder room. Of course, darling. Mrs. Chun can show you the way. But as Melanie stood, I noticed she gestured slightly to Andrew. A few minutes later, he excused himself as well. Patricia raised an eyebrow at me, and I shrugged delicately. Young people, Harold said with a chuckle. Always so restless. While they were gone, Richard leaned toward me. I think the shock is setting in, he murmured. Good. It's about time. When Melanie and Andrew returned, their faces were flushed, and they both looked agitated. They'd clearly had a heated, whispered conversation in the hallway. Mom, Melanie said as soon as she sat down. We need to talk about Christmas. Do we? I thought we already had that conversation. No, I mean, I was wrong. I was so wrong. I want to make it up to you. We could have Christmas here, couldn't we? The kids would love it, and we could invite Andrew's parents. I'm afraid that's not possible, I said gently. Why not? I sat down my fork and looked at her directly. Because I already have plans. I'm spending Christmas with people who actually want me there, not people who suddenly discovered I might be worth their time. The words hit like physical blows. Melanie flinched, and Andrew's face flushed red. That's not fair. Melanie said. You're my mother. Of course, I want you there. Really? Because 4 days ago I wasn't close enough family to warrant an invitation. What's changed, I wonder? Patricia coughed delicately. Perhaps this is a conversation for another time. No, I said firmly. I think it's exactly the right time. Melanie, you've spent years treating me like an embarrassment. You've made it clear that my company wasn't valuable to you, that I didn't fit into your vision of your life. And that was your choice to make. Mom. But now you've learned that I have money. Serious money. And suddenly I'm worthy of your attention again. Suddenly, I'm someone you want to spend holidays with, someone you want to introduce to your children as their grandmother. The dining room was dead silent, except for the soft crackle of the fire and the distant sound of waves against the rocks. The thing is, Melanie, wealth doesn't change who a person is. It just reveals it. I'm the same woman I was a month ago, the same woman who raised you and loved you and supported you through everything. The only thing that's changed is your perception of my value. Andrew started to speak, but I held up a hand to stop him. And that tells me everything I need to know about what I really mean to you. Melanie's eyes were filling with tears, but I felt strangely calm. This was truth-telling time, and the truth was long overdue. Mrs. Chun appeared in the doorway, and I nodded to her. I think it's time for dessert. The soufflé arrived in individual ramekins, each one a perfect golden dome that trembled slightly as Mrs. Chun set them before us. Beautiful, impressive, but destined to collapse at the slightest touch. Rather like my relationship with my daughter, I thought. How lovely, Patricia said, ever the diplomat, though I could see the concern in her eyes. The atmosphere at the table had shifted dramatically, and everyone could feel it. Melanie stared at her dessert without touching it, tears still threatening to spill over. Andrew looked like he was calculating something, probably the difference between his net worth and mine, and what that meant for his future plans. Mom, Melanie said softly. Please don't do this. I know I hurt you, but... But what, darling? I cut her off gently. But you didn't mean it? But it was a misunderstanding? But now that you know I'm worth $22 million, everything's different? I took a spoonful of my soufflé. It was delicious. Light as air, with just a hint of Grand Marnier. The truth is, Melanie, I'm actually grateful for that text message. Grateful, she whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. Oh, yes. It clarified things wonderfully. For years, I've been trying to figure out why our relationship felt so one-sided. Why I always left your house feeling smaller than when I arrived. Why your children barely knew me despite my constant efforts to be part of their lives. Harold shifted uncomfortably in his seat. This wasn't the kind of dinner conversation he'd signed up for, but to his credit, he stayed quiet. I thought maybe I was being too sensitive, I continued. Maybe I was imagining the distance, the subtle dismissals, the way you treated me like an obligation rather than a joy. But that text message made everything crystal clear. Please don't come for Christmas. We only want close family around. I looked up at Melanie. Close family. After 36 years of being your mother, I apparently don't qualify as close family. The silence was deafening. Richard was studying his wine glass with professional interest, clearly taking mental notes for future reference. And then, I continued, 3 days later, after seeing photos of this house on social media, my phone rang 59 times. 59 calls from the daughter who didn't want me around for Christmas because I wasn't close family. Andrew finally found his voice. Look, Vivian, maybe there was a miscommunication. Was there? I turned my attention to him. Andrew, in the 5 years you've been married to my daughter, how many times have you invited me to dinner? How many times have you called? Just to chat? How many times have you treated me like someone whose company you actually enjoyed rather than endured? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I'll help you with the math. 0. The answer is 0. I sat down my spoon and folded my hands in my lap. And that's fine, Andrew. You're not obligated to like your mother-in-law. But don't pretend this sudden interest in family bonding has nothing to do with my change in circumstances. You're being unfair. Melanie said, her voice stronger now, tinged with anger. Yes, I was surprised about the inheritance. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. Love, I smiled, a cold, hard smile. And I'm sure it wasn't entirely pleasant. Melanie, do you remember last Christmas? Of course. Where did I sit? She hesitated. What do you mean? Where did you seat me for Christmas dinner? The hesitation stretched longer. Patricia was now watching with the fascination of someone witnessing a perfectly executed diplomatic maneuver. You sat at the dining room table, Melanie said finally, a tremor in her voice. Did I? Because I remember sitting at a card table in the kitchen while the important adults, your husband's family, ate in the dining room. I remember you apologizing to his mother for the chaos of having too many people, as if my presence was an inconvenience you had to manage. Melanie's face went white. I remember bringing homemade cookies that your children weren't allowed to eat because they might spoil their dinner, while store-bought desserts from Andrew's mother were served with pride. I remember spending 3 hours in your kitchen helping with cleanup while his mother held court in the living room because she shouldn't have to work on Christmas. Mom, I remember driving home that night thinking that it might be the last Christmas I ever spent feeling like a second-class citizen in my own daughter's life. I picked up my spoon again and took another bite of soufflé. Turns out I was right. Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps we should move to the living room for coffee? Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the tension, I think this is the perfect time to share some news. Richard has been helping me with some legal arrangements since the inheritance, and I thought you should know about them. Andrew's fork clattered against his plate. What kind of arrangements? Well, obviously I've had to update my will. $22 million requires careful estate planning. Of course, Melanie said quickly, trying to regain some composure. That makes sense. I'm so glad you approve. Richard, would you like to explain the new provisions? My attorney set down his wine glass and assumed his professional demeanor. Certainly. Vivian has made some very thoughtful decisions about her legacy. The art collection will go to the Metropolitan Museum. Mrs. Chun, who has shown such loyalty and care, receives a substantial trust. There are educational trusts for the grandchildren, contingent on their maintaining independent relationships with their grandmother. Independent relationships? Andrew asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Meaning they're only eligible if they choose to maintain contact with Vivian, regardless of their parents' preferences, Richard explained smoothly. The house goes to a young woman who will truly appreciate its beauty and history, and the remaining assets are divided among various charitable causes that were important to Margaret. I watched Melanie's face as the implications sunk in, a dawning horror. What about me? Oh, you're remembered, of course, Richard said. There's a lovely provision for you. How much? Andrew asked, a desperate edge to his voice. Richard glanced at me, and I nodded. $1,000. And a letter explaining why. The soufflé on Melanie's plate had completely collapsed, leaving nothing but a sad, deflated mess. Rather fitting, I thought. $1,000? Andrew's voice cracked. Out of $22 million? Well, I said pleasantly. It's more than the zero consideration I received for Christmas. I thought that was rather generous, actually. Melanie started crying then, not the delicate tears of earlier, but ugly, choking sobs that shook her whole body. I felt a moment of sympathy, a fleeting flicker, but then I remembered the card table in the kitchen, the dismissive text message, the years of feeling like I had to earn my place in my own daughter's life. Vivian, Patricia said gently. Perhaps. No, I said firmly. This is exactly what needed to happen. Melanie made it very clear where I stood in her priorities. I'm simply aligning my priorities with hers. I stood up, my silk gown rustling softly. Now, shall we have coffee in the living room? Mrs. Chun has prepared some lovely petit fours, and Harold, I believe you promised to tell us about your recent trip to Vienna? The evening continued, but the real drama was over. Melanie and Andrew left shortly after coffee, both of them looking shell-shocked. The other guests stayed until nearly midnight, and by the time they left, the conversation had moved on to lighter topics. But I knew the real conversation was just beginning. I slept better that night than I had in months. There's something profoundly liberating about finally telling the truth after years of polite pretense. I woke to find the ocean calm and silvery in the morning light, as if even nature approved of the previous evening's honesty. Mrs. Chun brought me coffee in bed, a luxury I was still getting used to, but one I was beginning to embrace. How do you feel, Mrs. Thorpe? She asked with her characteristic directness. Lighter, I said, settling back against the Egyptian cotton pillows. Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there. Good, she responded, a small, approving smile on her face. The truth is supposed to feel that way. I spent the morning in the garden, despite the December chill, walking the paths and thinking about the evening ahead. Because I knew there would be an evening ahead. Melanie would be back, probably with reinforcements this time. The desperate usually are predictable. I was right. At 2 o'clock, my phone rang. Mom, please, can we talk? Really talk this time? We talked quite thoroughly last night, I thought. Please, I'm coming over. I need to see you. I'm afraid I'm busy today, darling. Mom, please. I'll wait. However long it takes. There was something in her voice, a desperation that was both pathetic and, I admit, oddly satisfying. Very well. But I have plans this evening, so we'll need to keep it brief. She arrived an hour later, and she looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her makeup was minimal, and she was wearing jeans and a sweater, the kind of casual clothes she never would have worn to my modest house because she knew I'd make an effort to dress nicely for her visits. Mom, she said as soon as Mrs. Chun showed her into the morning room. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I gestured to the chair across from me. For which part? Specifically? For all of it. For the Christmas text, for taking you for granted, for treating you like you didn't matter. I see. And when did this revelation occur to you? She had the grace to look ashamed. You know when. Don't. Enlighten me. When I found out about the money. At least she was being honest now. I sipped my tea and waited for her to continue. But that's not the only reason, she said quickly, trying to recover. I mean, it made me realize how wrong I'd been. But. Melanie, stop. Just stop. I set down my teacup. Do you know what the most painful part of last night was for me? She shook her head. It wasn't your reaction to learning about the inheritance. It wasn't Andrew's obvious calculations about what this might mean for your family's financial future. It was watching you try to pretend that money wasn't the catalyst for this sudden change of heart. It is just about money, isn't it, Melanie? If I had called you yesterday and said I'd lost everything, that I was broke and needed help, would you be sitting here right now begging for forgiveness? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I thought so, I said softly. That's not fair. You're my mother. I love you. Do you? Because love isn't just a feeling, Melanie. It's a choice. It's a series of choices made every day. And for years, you've chosen to treat me like an obligation rather than a gift. You've chosen to be embarrassed by me rather than proud of me. You've chosen to exclude me rather than include me. She was crying again, but I felt oddly detached from her tears. How many times had I cried alone after visiting her, wondering what I'd done wrong, why I wasn't enough. I can change, she whispered. I want to change. Can you? Because the fundamental issue hasn't changed, Melanie. I'm still the same person I was last week. The only difference is that now you know I have money. If that's what it takes for you to value me, then what happens when the money is gone? The money won't be gone. You just inherited it. The money isn't mine, I said quietly. She looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, I've already given it away. To people and causes that matter to me. To people who valued me before they knew I had anything to give. This wasn't entirely true, of course. The money was mine, and I had every intention of enjoying it. But I wanted to see her reaction, wanted to understand what she was really after. Her face went through a series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked remarkably like panic. You gave it away? All of it? Why does that upset you, darling? I thought you said this wasn't about money. It's not. It's just, why would you do that? Because Margaret left me that fortune to enjoy, not to use as leverage over people who should love me regardless of my net worth. She stared at me for a long moment. So, you're not rich anymore? I smiled. Would that change anything? No, of course not. You're still my mother. Am I? Because I seem to recall being told I wasn't close family. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it, then? She struggled for words, and I watched her try to find an explanation that would make her look less awful than she actually was. I just meant that Christmas was going to be small this year. Just Andrew's family and us. Andrew's family? His parents, his sister, his brother-in-law, his 2 nieces? That's 8 people, Melanie. How is that small? Well, I meant small in terms of energy. Andrew's mother has been having health issues, and we thought it would be better to keep things calm. I see. And my presence would have been disruptive to Andrew's mother's health. That's not what you meant, I said, standing up and moving to the window, looking out at the ocean, was that Andrew's family has money and status, and I was an embarrassment you didn't want to deal with. Be honest, Melanie. For once in your life, just be honest. She broke down completely then, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe, and I felt nothing. No urge to comfort her. No maternal instinct to make it better. She had burned through my sympathy with years of casual cruelty disguised as love. You want honesty, she choked out through her tears. Yes. I was embarrassed. Andrew's family has money and they judge people, and I didn't want them to look down on you. So you looked down on me instead. You were trying to protect me by excluding me from Christmas, by not putting me in a situation where you'd feel uncomfortable? I laughed, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. Melanie, I've been uncomfortable at every family gathering for years. The difference is that this time you decided I wasn't worth the effort of including me despite that discomfort. She had no answer for that. Here's what's going to happen, I said, turning back to her. You're going to leave now. You're going to go home and think very carefully about the choices you've made and the person you've become. And then you're going to decide whether you want to try to build a real relationship with me, one based on mutual respect and genuine affection, or whether you want to continue the charade we've been playing for years. What kind of real relationship? The kind where you call me because you want to talk to me, not because you need something. The kind where you invite me to things because you enjoy my company, not because you feel obligated. The kind where you treat me like someone you're proud to know, not someone you have to manage. I paused. But understand this, Melanie. I will never again accept being treated as less than I am. I will never again pretend that your scraps of attention are enough to sustain me. And I will never again prioritize your comfort over my own dignity. She wiped her face with her sleeve. And if I can't do that? If I can't change? Then we'll have our answer, won't we? After she left, I sat alone in the morning room for a long time, watching the light change on the water. Mrs. Chun brought me fresh tea without being asked, and I was grateful for her silent understanding. At 6 o'clock, Harold arrived for dinner, just the two of us this time, something quiet and civilized after the emotional chaos of the previous evening. "How are you feeling?" he asked as we sat down to Mrs. Chun's perfectly prepared salmon. "Honest," I said. "For the first time in years, completely honest." "It suits you," he said with his warm smile. "You look radiant." And you know what? I felt radiant. I felt like I'd finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. Stopped trying to earn love that should have been freely given. Stopped accepting less than I deserved. Whatever happened with Melanie, now I would be fine. Better than fine. I would be free. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, with a kind of crystalline winter light that makes everything look like it's been touched by magic. I woke early, as I always do, and took my coffee out to the enclosed sunroom to watch the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of rose and gold. I was alone, and I was perfectly content. The past week had been blissfully quiet. Melanie had called twice, brief, awkward conversations where she tried to feel out whether I was serious about the inheritance being gone. I'd been deliberately vague, letting her wonder. Andrew had sent a text apologizing for his behavior at dinner, which I'd ignored entirely. Instead, I'd spent the week with people who actually enjoyed my company. Patricia and I had driven to New York for a day of shopping and museum visits. Harold had taken me to see the Nutcracker at Lincoln Center, and afterward, we'd had dinner at a restaurant where the maitre d' remembered my name and treated me like royalty. Mrs. Chun's daughter was visiting from California and had been charmed by this accomplished young doctor who clearly adored her mother. I'd hosted book club for my reading group, women my age who were living full, interesting lives, and who valued intelligence and wit over bank account balances. In short, I'd remembered what it felt like to be valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. At 10 o'clock, as I was arranging some flowers Mrs. Chun had cut from the greenhouse, my phone rang. A known number. Vivian Thorpe speaking. Grandma Vivian? The voice was young, uncertain. Emma. My heart leaped. Emma was Melanie's oldest, just turned 16, and she'd always been my favorite, though I'd been careful never to show it. Yes, it's me. I wanted to call you to wish you Merry Christmas. That's very sweet of you, darling. Merry Christmas to you, too. There was a pause. Grandma, are you really not coming to Christmas dinner? I sat down in the window seat, looking out at the ocean. No, sweetheart, I'm not. Mom said you were busy with other plans. I am. I'm spending Christmas with friends who want me here. Another pause. Are you mad at us? Out of the mouths of babes. I'm not mad, Emma. I'm just done accepting invitations where I'm not truly wanted. I want you here, she said quietly. My heart broke a little. I know you do, sweetheart. And that means more to me than you'll ever know. Could I come visit you sometime? Mom showed me pictures of your new house. It looks incredible. I would love that. Anytime you want. What about next weekend? I could take the train. I'll pick you up from the station. We'll have a wonderful time. After we hung up, I sat for a long moment, thinking about the difference between Emma's call and her mother's manipulative attempts at reconciliation. Emma had called because she missed me, because she genuinely wanted to see me. There was no agenda, no calculation, just honest affection. It gave me hope that not all family connections were doomed to be transactional. At noon, Richard called. Merry Christmas, Vivian. I hope you're having a peaceful day. I am. Thank you. And you? Wonderful. Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up. I received a call from Andrew yesterday. He was asking about contesting your will. I wasn't surprised. What did you tell him? That while anyone can contest a will, they need grounds to do so. And I don't like the distribution isn't sufficient legal cause. I also mentioned the no contest clause, which would forfeit even the token amount you left Melanie if she challenges the will. Good. What else? He asked about your mental competency, whether there might be grounds to claim you weren't of sound mind when you made the changes. I laughed. Considering we have witnesses to that dinner party, including you, I think my mental competency is well documented. Exactly what I told him. Vivian, you've been my client for 15 years. You're one of the sharpest people I know. Any judge would see that immediately. Thank you, Richard. Anything else? He also asked whether the inheritance was real. Apparently, there's some question about whether you actually have the money you claim to have. This was interesting. What kind of question? Well, he seems to think you might have been lying about the amount, or that there might be debts or liens against the estate that would reduce its value significantly. I smiled. Melanie had clearly shared my comment about giving the money away, and they were grasping at straws, hoping that maybe the inheritance wasn't as substantial as it appeared. Richard, would you do me a favor? Of course. Would you prepare a complete accounting of my current assets? Everything. The house valuation, the investment accounts, the art collection appraisal, the property holdings. I want exact numbers. Certainly. Are you thinking of sharing this information? I'm thinking it's time for complete transparency. No more questions, no more speculation. Just cold, hard facts. I'll have it ready by tomorrow. Make 2 copies. I have a feeling I'm going to need them. That evening, I had a quiet Christmas dinner with Harold, Patricia, and a few other friends. We ate by candlelight in the formal dining room, and the conversation was sophisticated and warm. Patricia had brought her granddaughter Emma, a different Emma from my granddaughter, but equally lovely, who was home from her first year at Harvard and full of fascinating stories about her studies in international relations. As we sat around the table, laughing and sharing stories, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what family dinner should feel like. Celebratory, inclusive, joyful. No one was seated at a card table. No one's contributions were dismissed or overlooked. Everyone was genuinely happy to be there. Vivian, Harold said as we finished dessert. You seem different lately. More yourself, if that makes sense. It makes perfect sense, I said. I feel like I've been rediscovering who I am when I'm not trying to be who someone else needs me to be. It suits you beautifully, Patricia added. You're glowing. And I was. For the first time in years, I felt like the woman I'd always been inside, confident, interesting, worthy of respect and affection. It had taken a $22 million inheritance to remind me of my own value, but now that I remembered, I wasn't going to forget again. The next morning, Richard delivered the asset summary as promised. The numbers were even more impressive than I'd remembered. Primary residence, Windmere Estate, $18.2 million. Investment portfolio, $15.7 million. Art and antiques collection, $3.1 million. Additional properties, Aspen, Martha's Vineyard, $4.8 million. Business interests and royalties, $2.3 million. Liquid assets, $1.2 million. Total net worth, $45.3 million. Margaret had been even more successful than she'd let on, and her investments had performed brilliantly in the months since her death. I was, by any measure, extraordinarily wealthy. I made 3 copies of the document and sealed them in elegant cream envelopes. Then I sat down at Margaret's antique writing desk and composed a letter. My dear family, since there seems to be some confusion about my financial situation, I thought complete transparency would be helpful. Enclosed, you will find a comprehensive accounting of my current assets, prepared by my attorney and verified by independent appraisers. As you can see, Margaret's generosity has left me very well provided for. I want to be absolutely clear that I have not given away this inheritance, nor are there any debts or encumbrances that would reduce its value. I also want to be clear about my intentions regarding these assets. My will, as currently written, distributes them as I described at our recent dinner. This is not a negotiation or a threat. It is simply information. However, I remain open to rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. If you are interested in pursuing this, please contact me directly. But understand that any future relationship must be based on who I am as a person, not what I might leave you in my will. The choice, as always, is yours. With love and clarity, Mother. I hand-delivered 1 copy to Melanie's house that afternoon, leaving it with a housekeeper when no one answered the door. The other copies I kept, along with Richard's business card, in case they were needed later. Then I went home to my beautiful house by the ocean, opened a bottle of champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and toasted my newfound freedom. The ball was now in their court. I was curious to see how they would play it. 1 year later, I woke up on Christmas morning in my own bed, in my own magnificent house, surrounded by people who truly wanted to be there. Emma, my granddaughter Emma, was in the guest room down the hall. She'd been spending weekends with me regularly since that first phone call, and our relationship had blossomed into something beautiful and real. She loved the house, yes, but more importantly, she loved our conversations, our walks on the beach, our cooking experiments in the massive kitchen. She was curious about my life, my experiences, my thoughts on everything from books to politics to love. She was also furious with her mother, though I tried to discourage that. At 16, she was old enough to understand exactly what had happened, and she'd drawn her own conclusions about her mother's behavior. "Grandma," she'd said during one of our beach walks in the fall, "I can't believe Mom treated you like that. I would never do that to someone I loved. Your mother is complicated, sweetheart. She's not a bad person. She's just lost her way." "She's not lost," Emma retorted, her young voice firm. "She's selfish." I couldn't really argue with that assessment. Mrs. Chun was downstairs preparing Christmas brunch for our guests, Patricia and her family, Harold, Richard and his wife, several friends from my book club, and a few others who had become important to me over the past year. The kind of gathering where everyone actually wanted to be there, where conversation flowed naturally, where no one felt like they had to perform or prove anything. As I lay in bed watching the winter sun dance across the ocean, I reflected on the extraordinary year it had been. The morning after I delivered that letter to Melanie, she'd called in hysterics. The reality of $45 million had hit her like a physical blow, and the realization that she'd thrown away her inheritance over a Christmas text message had sent her into what could only be described as a complete breakdown. "Mom, please," she'd sobbed into the phone. "I'll do anything, anything. Just tell me how to fix this." But the thing about broken trust is that it can't be fixed with desperation. It can only be rebuilt with time, consistency, and genuine change, things Melanie seemed incapable of providing. Over the following months, she tried everything. She'd sent flowers every week for 2 months until I finally asked her to stop because Mrs. Chun was running out of vases. She'd written long, rambling letters full of childhood memories and promises to be better. She'd even tried to turn the grandchildren against me, telling them I was being cruel and unreasonable, a strategy that backfired spectacularly when Emma asked me directly what was going on. Andrew, meanwhile, had consulted 3 different attorneys about contesting the will, only to be told repeatedly that I was clearly of sound mind and had every right to leave my money to whomever I chose. He'd even hired a private investigator to look into my finances, hoping to find some evidence of fraud or mental incapacity. The investigator had found nothing except confirmation that I was exactly as wealthy as I claimed to be and exactly as sharp-eyed. Their marriage, built on a foundation of social climbing, had crumbled under the weight of what they'd lost. Andrew blamed Melanie for alienating me. Melanie blamed Andrew for pushing her to exclude me in the first place. And both of them seemed to blame me for having the audacity to take them at their word. They'd separated in September and were now in the middle of what promised to be a very ugly divorce. I felt sorry for the children, of course, but Emma had chosen to maintain her relationship with me despite her parents' drama, and I was hopeful that the younger ones would eventually do the same when they were old enough to make their own decisions. As for Melanie herself, well, she'd made her bed with Egyptian cotton sheets of entitlement and casual cruelty. Now, she was lying in it, alone and bitter, wondering how her perfect plan to marry up and live comfortably had gone so spectacularly wrong. I got dressed in a cashmere sweater the color of a winter sky and went downstairs to join my chosen family for Christmas brunch. The dining room was filled with laughter and the kind of easy conversation that comes when people genuinely enjoy each other's company. Emma was explaining her college plans to Harold, who was listening with the attention of someone who actually cared about her thoughts and dreams. Patricia was telling Richard's wife about her latest diplomatic adventure while Mrs. Chun moved through the room, making sure everyone had everything they needed. "Vivian," Harold said, raising his champagne glass. "I'd like to propose a toast." The room quieted, and everyone turned toward me. "A year ago, you taught all of us something important about the difference between love and obligation, between family and blood relations, between what we owe others and what we owe ourselves." He smiled that warm smile that had become so dear to me. "You showed us that it's never too late to stop accepting less than we deserve." Never too late to surround ourselves with people who truly value us, and never too late to live with the dignity and joy we were meant to have. Here, here, Patricia said, and the others joined in. As I looked around the table at these faces, some old friends, some new, all genuine, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not for the money, though that had certainly made things easier, but for the clarity it had provided. The inheritance hadn't changed who I was. It had simply given me the courage to stop pretending to be less than I was. After brunch, Emma and I took our traditional Christmas walk on the beach. The December air was crisp but not bitter, and the ocean stretched endlessly before us, still gray under the winter sky. "Grandma," she said as we walked. "I got a Christmas card from Mom yesterday." "Oh, she wanted me to give it to you. She said she misses you and wants to try again." I took the envelope Emma handed me but didn't open it. I knew what it would say. More apologies, more promises, more attempts to manipulate me through guilt and family obligation. "What do you think I should do?" I asked my granddaughter. Emma was quiet for a moment, picking up shells and skipping them across the waves. At 17 now, she'd grown into a thoughtful, intelligent young woman who saw the world clearly. "I think," she said finally, "that some people don't change. They just get better at saying the things they think you want to hear." "That's very wise. Mom hurt you for years, didn't she? Before the Christmas thing, I mean." I nodded. "She did. Not intentionally, perhaps, but consistently. And now she's sorry because she found out what it cost her." "Yes." Emma stopped walking and turned to face me. "Grandma, you taught me that love isn't supposed to hurt. You taught me that the people who really care about us don't make us feel small or unwanted or like we have to earn their affection. You taught me that I deserve to be with people who light up when they see me, not people who make me feel like I'm bothering them just by existing." My eyes filled with tears. "You do deserve that, sweetheart. You deserve all of that and more. So do you." We walked back to the house in comfortable silence, and I slipped Melanie's card into my pocket without opening it. Later, when I was alone, I would read it and then file it away with all the others. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation, because the truth was, I had learned to love myself too much to go back to accepting scraps from people who should have been offering me banquets. That evening, as my guests prepared to leave, Harold lingered behind. "Walk with me," he asked, gesturing toward the terrace. We stepped outside into the clear, cold night. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the ocean murmured softly against the rocks below. "Vivian," he said, taking my hand. "This has been the most wonderful year. Getting to know you, really know you, has been." He paused, searching for words. "You're extraordinary. You know that, don't you?" I smiled. "I'm learning to believe it." "Good, because I have something to ask you." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. "Harold, I know we haven't known each other long," he said quickly. "And I know you're still healing from everything that happened with your family, but Vivian, I love you. Not your money, not your beautiful house, not any of the external things. I love your intelligence, your strength, your capacity for both justice and mercy. I love the way you read 3 books at once and remember everything. I love how you treat Mrs. Chun like family, and how you light up when Emma calls. I love that you're brave enough to demand the respect you deserve." He opened the box, revealing a ring that was elegant and understated. Exactly what I would have chosen for myself. "Will you marry me?" I looked at this good, kind man who had spent a year showing me what it felt like to be truly valued, who had never once made me feel like I needed to earn his attention or prove my worth. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, just like everything else in my new life. We kissed on the terrace of my magnificent house under a sky full of stars while the ocean whispered its approval below us. And for the first time in decades, I felt complete. 2 years later, I'm writing this from the villa in Tuscany where Harold and I are spending our second honeymoon. The view from our bedroom window is of rolling hills covered in grapevines and olive trees, and the morning light turns everything golden. Emma is graduating from Harvard this spring with honors, and she's already been accepted to medical school. She calls me every week, sometimes just to chat about her classes, sometimes to ask for advice about boys or career decisions. She's never once asked me for money, though I've certainly helped with expenses. She values our relationship for what it is, not what it might get her. My younger grandchildren, now old enough to make their own choices, have started reaching out as well. They're curious about their grandmother who lives in a mansion by the sea, but more importantly, they're curious about me as a person. We're building relationships slowly, carefully, based on genuine interest rather than obligation. As for Melanie, she sends a card every Christmas and on my birthday. I read them now, though I rarely respond. She's working as a real estate agent, struggling to rebuild her life after the divorce. She's dating someone new, a man who, according to Emma, seems to genuinely care about her rather than what she can do for him. I hope she's learning to value authentic connection over social climbing. But that's her journey to make. I don't hate her. I don't even dislike her anymore. I simply don't trust her. And I've learned that trust, once broken by calculated cruelty, is nearly impossible to fully repair. But I've also learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to love you, who celebrate your successes without jealousy, who support you through difficulties without keeping score. It's about the people who make you feel more like yourself, not less. Mrs. Chun is family. Harold is family. Emma is family. Patricia and Richard and all the friends who gathered around my table that first Christmas in my new life, they're family, too. And me, I'm finally free to be exactly who I was always meant to be. A woman of substance, intelligence, and worth, surrounded by people who recognize and celebrate those qualities. The Christmas text that broke my heart 2 years ago turned out to be the greatest gift Melanie ever gave me. It forced me to stop accepting less than I deserved and start building a life filled with people who truly wanted me in it. I may have lost a daughter, but I found myself. And in the end, that trade was worth every penny of the inheritance that made it possible. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt undervalued or taken for granted by people who should cherish you, remember this: you deserve better. You deserve to be someone's first choice, not their obligation. You deserve to be celebrated, not tolerated. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for them, and for yourself, is to stop accepting their version of love and start demanding the real thing. As my story quietly slips away now, dissolving into the silent spaces where memory and mystery entwine, understand that this was never just a tale I told. It was an awakening. A raw pulse of human truth wrapped in whispered secrets and unveiled emotions. Every word a shard of fractured reality, every sentence a bridge between worlds seen and unseen, between the light of revelation and the dark abyss of what remains unsaid. It is here, in this liminal space, that stories breathe their most potent magic, stirring the deepest chambers of your soul, provoking the unspoken fears, the buried desires, and the fragile hopes that cling to your heart like embers. This is the power of these tales, these digital confessions whispered into the void where anonymity becomes the mask for truth and every listener becomes the keeper of secrets too heavy to carry alone. And now that secret, that trembling echo of someone else's reality, becomes part of your own shadowed narrative, intertwining with your thoughts, awakening that undeniable curiosity, that insatiable hunger to know what lies beyond. What stories have yet to be told, what mysteries hover just out of reach, waiting for you to uncover them. So hold on to this feeling, this electric thread of wonder and unease. For it is what connects us all across the vast, unseen web of human experience. And if your heart races, if your mind lingers on the what-ifs and the maybes, then you know the story has done its work. Its magic has woven itself into the very fabric of your being. So before you step away from this realm, remember this: every story you encounter here is a whispered invitation to look deeper, to listen harder, to embrace the darkness and the light alike. If you found yourself lost, if you found yourself changed even slightly, then honor this connection by keeping the flame alive. Let the story linger. Let it spark your own reflections. Because here, we don't merely tell stories. We summon them. We become vessels for the forgotten, the hidden, and the unspoken. And you, dear listener, have become part of this sacred ritual. So until the next tale finds you in the quiet hours, keep your senses sharp, your heart open, and never stop chasing the whispers in the silence. Take care. Live well.